They said it was clean, too cheap to meter. Built the dome, then cooked the beaker. Said the rod was safe as sealed in drums, but left them leaking out of Idaho slums. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear's not dumb. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is fun.
Hello.
Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear has won. Hallelujah, nuclear exceptionalism is done.
Welcome. Always takes me a minute.
They chase the sun, all fusion proud. Ignore the barrel stacked in
Hope everybody's doing well.
Stars in every socket. Wacurium settled
Almost
in
there.
the market.
Yeehaw.
Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear's not dumb. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is fun. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear has won.
Yeah.
Hallelujah, nuclear exceptionalism is done.
Yeah, sorry about that. It was a little rough. It's James Lucett's latest anti-nuclear song. Gotta love the words in that one. Holy smokes. Should the International Atomic Energy Agency in Japan explain why they never reported hundreds of tanks are missing for 2 years? I think that's a pretty interesting statement, isn't it? Can you back it up, though, Dana? Yeah, that's the saddest part of this story. Not surprising, unfortunately, but it's the sad part of the story. Hey, morning, Dana. Hi. What, you get a load of that title today? Isn't that something? So hundreds of tanks are missing for years. So I was reading this, I was getting ready for tonight's show. And this showed up under Fukushima. Israel selected a site for the first nuclear power plant. They have a breeder reactor in Israel for making plutonium for the weapons, their nuclear weapons. But anyway, I'm going to cover this story some other time. So it was this picture that I seen. And I said, well, where's all the tanks? The first thing struck my mind was, where in goodness gracious is all the tanks? And so, because it's 14 years. We have 14 years gone by. So the official story is, in August 2023, August 24, 2023, Japan, the International Atomic Energy Agency, had a huge campaign that they were going to start dumping tanks into the Pacific Ocean because they needed to make room for other facilities. So the only tanks you see in this picture, I got highlighted up there for you. I zoomed in on it. That's up behind reactor 6 and 5 and S reactor 5 and S reactor 6. And I was like, well, that bank over there, I'm familiar with the whole site very clearly, right? Now, it's supposed to be 1,000 tanks on this site, and we can only count 750. This was a couple of years back when they had announced they were going to allegedly start dumping tanks into the ocean. That it has never stopped going into the ocean. Tanks were built as an illusion for people. So when you're looking at this picture up right there, and I'll move up there and start highlighting things for you. And by the way, you can call in at 709-589-4406. We're in Canada. It's an unusual time for us to do a live show. But why should that matter? Does that really matter? That it's... I think we need a discussion on this subject immediately. And so this is before pictures. This could be 2014, 2015 kind of era. And so you can see those small tanks. And I'll be able to highlight things for you a bit better in a second here. So you see these small, these are what I call small compared to those tanks, but they're not small, they're big tanks. And this is reactor 4, that's the common spent fuel pool. And this bank right here, see that bank, how it's built up? And they cemented the base of the bank to try to direct the emissions from, because they buried a lot of fuel with the remote control bulldozers that had exploded from the reactors. So reactor 1, and because the cover is still on reactor 1, the cover came off after 5 years. So this was within the first 5 years. Bear with me. Probably the most important video in years that we've... They have removed tanks and never told anybody, and it claimed that they only started removing them in 2023, August 24th. Right? Not even then, it was after that. So that's what the site... This was a picture that came out in Israel picture. Now I've never seen this particular picture before. And we've been covering this since day one, basically. So we have an incredible amount of documentation. And so when you look at this picture, you're going to see a lot of buildings in the background there that weren't there. These buildings are not here right in this, because you still have the cover on reactor 1. So that's the first 5 years. So these buildings were built after. You can see now there's no cover on reactor 1. That's reactor 2. Reactor 3 has its cover. Reactor 4. And these are just covers over shells. The reactor buildings don't even exist. This was to lie and manipulate and deceive you. Let me show you some of this stuff. So reactor 4, which is this building right here, they put a cover over it and claimed they went in and got the fuel pools from the top of the buildings. That's the bottom of the building. The building doesn't exist. And I'll show you schematics of what it should look alongside what it does look like before they put the cover over it in. So they're pretending they're at the top of the buildings in 2013 and 14, getting 8 reactor cores out of the fuel pools that they still haven't acknowledged. So the fuel was at the top of these 190-foot, 65-meter, 19-story buildings. And you can see this is not a 190-foot building anymore, right? And then you can see over in the corner, where the corner is gouged out. And this to your left is Seth Dorn, a senator from the United States, claiming he's at the top, that he's way up here. But you can see how destroyed the building actually is when you look at it. It's all the way down to this section here. Basically twice the height of a truck. And 190-foot, that's if you're being generous. But of course, if you look at the building before they put the structure over it, that I'll show you another different picture angle. The entire building is gutted on the other side. The building is blown up. So there is no functional building whatsoever. And so they've done this to both reactor 3 and reactor 4, where they put contraptions over it. And a single picture. So a single picture, because it's very rare for them, like when a story comes out about Fukushima, they'll all have the same picture. So there could be 500 stories written about something happened at Fukushima. They'll all have the exact same pictures, the same paragraphs, the same author. So this is an extrapolation from a picture that came out a few years ago. And here's the original picture coming up. I just got to make a point before we talk about the tanks. There's hundreds of tanks missing. So this particular picture was an unusual picture because it was such high quality. And I was able to zoom in and get pictures that have never been released. This is one of those pictures. Now you can see all the debris on on the roof, the stump. This was a contraption to put over it. And they came out with a campaign saying that they got all the fuel out of the fuel pool. They done a similar thing to reactor 3, where they put a contraption over it. None of these contraptions physically touch the remains because they're so fragile. But the idea is to convince you that they're at the top of the buildings that don't even exist anymore. And they did. And there's no descending voices except for us. Hang on, bear with me. So today, a story come out about a new power plant in Israel, and I had a picture I've never seen before, and the tanks are missing. And we go backwards. So that was the picture, and the first thing I noticed, there was no tanks, like over here, where there should be lots of tanks, right? Should be tons of tanks. Now I have a huge collection. I'm going to start digging in that once I get through this initial explanation. Excuse me. I just want to lay a good foundation for previous lies. As you can see, physically, the contraption doesn't touch the building, right? All right. And here's one more picture we need so I can get into the rest of the story. So this is some of the media.
Standing.
Sorry. So I created this video in 2013. And I just turned the volume down. That volume should have been turned down in its original spot. It wasn't, unfortunately. So they're pretending they're 150 feet above the stump of reactor 4. That's just some of the media that done that. So there is a precedence for them lying. Well, there's a real long precedence for lies. All right, so here we go again. So I should be able to see those tanks that I highlighted right there. And you can see these buildings now are in that place. And you see the bank over to your left. This is, and you can see, am I zoomed in on that one, I wonder? So here's another angle behind reactor 4, and let me point up reactor 4 for you. For those who might be unfamiliar with this, that's reactor 4. So these tanks in particular, we should have been able to see minimum. They have removed everything. All of this stuff has been removed also and built up. And we should have been able to see a section of these tanks here and corners of these tanks over here. So there's hundreds of tanks clearly is going to be missing. And they haven't explained where the two or what happened to them. And here's the picture, the recent picture. Now right beyond reactor 4, and we got a really good view with this picture on this. And this is an angle. I don't know if we've ever seen this angle before, have we? And so let me go into my collection here. Let me see what I can drag out of, because I have hundreds of pictures of the site. Fukushima tanks. We want a void. First thing we want to get is a void site. So here's an early picture. This is 2013, probably 2013, 2014 picture. And you can see all the trees and everything beyond the reactors and stuff like that. Versus what it looks like now. So there's reactor 4 again. Or reactor 4, that's reactor 3 rather, that's reactor 4. So the question is, where are the tanks? Now, there was allegedly 1,000 tanks built. At the top of these buildings was 8 reactor cores, and they haven't acknowledged that. But originally they did.
And if, in terms of what we know about the capacity, about how many fuel rods would likely be inside that reactor, what sort of quantity are we talking about radioactivity?
I've heard different numbers ranging from 2 to 15 reactor cores worth. No, 2 to about 8 reactor cores worth.
So if it can't be controlled, that's worst case scenario, 8 reactors worth of radioactivity.
Right.
So 8 tanks at the top of these buildings is a safe bet because they don't have a repository anywhere, let alone in Japan. 2013, TEPCO sent a press release announcing plans to attempt to operate the Elbs by September of 2013. But the image that they released are showing us that they haven't even got the facility built. These are complicated facilities that could never work. You can't filter the water because you can't change the filter. And then once the filter has 20 minutes for an hour's use, you can't get back into buildings because you're talking about multiple sieverts per liter. And the filters would have to be extraordinary. Now, the hoses that would have been bringing the water into the filtration system, you won't be able to step over them or walk alongside them. They would be lethal doses too, even if they were empty later, because we're talking about so much radioactivity per liter. But the story here, rather, August 9, 2014. So in this story, they talk about the ELP system still not operational, and they're hoping by the end of the year, but in reality, the announcement was 2015. Now, the event happened in 2011. Right, this was almost the end of 2014. So they still didn't have an operation. So there was no filtration system on that site. So where did all the water go? Now, one of the stories, according to the BBC, was that the water underneath the site, there was an aquifer, and they had pumped up the water from the aquifer, and that's all in 2013 and filled up the tanks. Just give me a minute, see if I can. In 2013. My goodness, I'm quite the pack rat, eh? Well, it should be right here somewhere. That's not it. It should be right above that then, maybe. And so I wanted to put out a video why my mind was still like switched on, because if you wait 5 or 6 hours, sometimes you lose the context of your train of thoughts. I hope you bear with me for a few more moments. See if I can. Apparently I can't find that video right now. Probably because it's basically we need to have we desperately, there it is. we need to have a conversation, a serious conversation. So we're going to tackle this subject for quite a bit coming up, and every day after that, I'm sure. This is the BBC, Rupert Winfield Hayes in 2013, saying they got 1,000 tanks on this site. You have TEPCO saying they have no control over the water, also in this little short video. And the BBC, Rupert Winfield Hayes, has explained all the tanks are full from the highly radioactive water in an aquifer underneath the reactor. I'll be right back.
Fukushima plant sits smack in the middle of an underground aquifer. Deep beneath the ground, the site is rapidly being overwhelmed by water. Beneath the surface, water flows downhill and into the basement of the damaged reactor buildings. There it is contaminated with high levels of radiation. To stop the groundwater flowing on into the nearby ocean, engineers are building an underground barrier. But that is causing the groundwater level to rapidly rise. It's now so high the water will soon reach the surface. Then it will start flowing overground into the sea. This week, the company that owns Fukushima, TEPCO, made this disturbing admission.
We understand that this water discharge is beyond our control, and we do not think the current situation is good.
Outside experts say it's now clear TEPCO is incapable of handling the cleanup at Fukushima. It's time for the Japanese government to step in. The situation is already beyond what TEPCO can handle, he says. If it were possible to take proper measures, they would have done it already. It's not as if TEPCO is refusing to do what they can. They're doing everything they can, but there are no perfect solutions. Even if the government does step in, it's not clear what it can do. The only other solution is to pump out the contaminated groundwater and put it in storage tanks. But after just 2 years, the site is already jammed with more than 1,000 giant tanks. Most of them are already full up. At least 400 tons of new water pours into the site every day, and it's going to continue for years and years. Fukushima's water crisis has only just begun. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News in Tokyo.
400 tons a day would be equal to 3 garden hoses at 30 pounds per square inch, half-inch garden hoses. So all the tanks are full. TEPCO says they have no control. And this is 2013. And you can see the contraption they put on the site to trick people into thinking they were in a fuel pool. It's an egregious lie. All right, let's get back on track here. We're almost through. So just wanted to get a conversation started, basically. And because this is, the implications of this are catastrophic, I put a bunch of headlines below the video to try to give people that are not familiar with the subject some context. And I never had a single view on the preamble until about 2 minutes before we went live. And I had to redo all the security because I couldn't stream. So I was a few minutes late in starting my stream because I got fiber optics, a gigabyte a second fiber optics. And I couldn't stream. I had to stop the stream. I had to go in and set a new security for YouTube and that. And a new streaming key, and punch all that in, and then connect to YouTube again before I can get a stream to work, which is very unusual. And because my internet is perfect and I'm on fiber optics, there's no reasonable explanation for that. So that was outside interference. Like when they arrested me and gave me gag orders, it's outside interference, right? They couldn't silence me totally, but they can silence me on certain subjects, right? For a certain period of time, and that's what they went ahead and done. They chose that option. All right. So we got a problem, another major problem. It's not, like I say, it's not the first lie they told. And when you count all the tanks on the site, you're only left with about, counting the little tiny tanks too. And I'll just show you them one more time. You still only come up with 750 tanks, but you're being extremely generous. So if you count these small tanks and these small tanks, and those small tanks back here, and those small tanks right there, and other pictures, you'll see a few more. Then at best you're going to end up with 750 tanks on that site. So he said in 2013 they had 1,000 tanks. They were all full from water they pumped up underneath the site itself, from the aquifer, from wells they have drilled around the site to take samples. The water was so toxic, they pumped it all up and said they filled up 1,000 tanks. Problem is that you're talking about multiple sieverts per liter. And what that means is if you put that in a tank, these 300,000 gallon tanks, or 380,000 gallons worth of big tanks, then anyway, we've done the mathematics on it, and it was 1.4 million sieverts, 1.4 million sieverts of just beta, not counting alphas, neutrons, and gammas. So we've been 6, 7, 8 sieverts per liter is what we're talking about. So you can't filter that. You can't run that through a line because anybody walks within 10 feet of that, 20 feet of that line is going to get a lethal dose. Their organs are going to melt. You can't put this stuff in the tank because you have there's multiple reasons you can't do it. Is you can't build another site, another tank anywhere in proximity, and people can't survive there because you're talking about 1.4 million sieverts is just beta emanating from those tanks. These are 3 to 4 sieverts is a lethal dose. 1.4 million is a sniper round from a distance. And because you're talking about, and another reason that story doesn't work, what BBC was telling you, where they fill up all the tanks with stuff they pumped up from the aquifer, and I showed you there was no filtration system, even if they could work. The Areva system, the Siri system, the ELF system, clearly none of these can work because of the doses we're talking about per liter. Okay, so the tanks, we assume they're empty, and because a couple of years back they had a significant earthquake, and 50 of the tanks shifted. 50 of the tanks shifted, and beneath the contraptions they put over reactor 3 and 4, the buildings actually looked like that. So they would have just fell apart. With an earthquake that would cause 50 tanks to shift positions. So the most likely scenario was the tanks were empty, and that's why they shifted positions, because these are massive tanks. If they were full, there was no way they were going to move. So we assumed the tanks had to be empty. Again, this is before they took the cover off reactor 1. You can see the white cover, the Kevlar sarcophagus they put over it for 5 years. So that's still there, which means this picture is within the first, or within year 3 to year 5, say, right? It's because they have this contraption. Reactor 3 has no contraption on it. And the contraption is where they pretend they're actually in the buildings, at the top of the buildings that don't even exist. So let me play the video for you. It's only a 1-minute video. This was just 4 different well-known media. CBS, which is America. CNN is America. BBC is Europe, is United Kingdom. ABC Australia, Cecilia Vega is the major media in Australia. That was just a fraction of it. I felt they were good examples. Let me play this clip.
What I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building
hang on. I put my headphones on to do that again for you. I missed it by the sounds of it. I'll get the audio.
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
Okay, so TEPCO's done nothing for over 2 years to stop the highly radioactive water leak once above a sievert an hour. Because when atoms is pulses for a second or a minute. Whereas when you get to sieverts, they measure it in hours, but it's a very deceptive So just give me 1 minute, because you need another piece of information to go with that. I'm basically in shock that they done this. I'm not surprised, but I'm in shock because we caught them. Bear with me. That went pretty good. I should find that. Right here. There's a couple of those headlines are important. Here we go. TEPCO made Fukushima plant to machine for generating radioactive water straight into the ocean. As TEPCO told you, they had no control in that video I played of TEPCO in 2013 from the BBC. Rupert Winfield Hayes was the reporter. TEPCO done nothing for over 2 years to stop the highly radioactive water. And they always call it a leak. It's very upsetting every time I hear the word. It has not been done to this day. And it's working up and done this day because of the difficulties involved, which are lethal. Your organs melt at 3 sieverts. And where was that other headline? Just hang on. I know where it's at. There we go. So 2 sieverts an hour from a single liter of water. 3 sieverts, well, that's a lethal dose if you're there for 20 minutes or something, but at a liter of water. You don't have to be right by it either. You can be 10, 15 feet away from it. So a lethal dose of beta, and that's beta. And they say from a tank. Now, if that was true, you couldn't go in there and get a reading because it's a lethal dose. You could never go back near that. You can't mitigate that ever. You can't go near it ever again. And that if the tank was that much, then, yeah, and we forgot to mention that part, that if you're taking this, pumping the water up from underneath the site and putting it directly in the tank, which is the claim they had made, right, from the BBC, Rupert Winfield Hayes reporter video, with TEPCO saying they have no control, and which meant they were just pumping it directly into the tank. So you're talking about pumping in fuel particles. And at your time, I showed you Frank von Hippel's March 16, 2011 video from the TV. And so what that meant was that the fuel particulates are going to settle on the bottom because they're fairly heavy, right? Compared to the atoms, which are all the same size, no matter what kind of atom it is. You put 2 million on the head of a needle, you can't see it. So they're gonna be like sediment in a mud. They're gonna look like a mud. If you can see them, physically see them, they look like a mud puddle because they're just saturated throughout the water. And so with these particles, you got gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas all together in one spot on the bottom. You're gonna have a chain reaction like we've seen at on the Tetra River at the Mayak facility, and also at Hanford, United States, right? And so you'll have a chain reaction because you have all these elements are together, and they've already gone through a chain reaction, so they're very active. They're always splitting atoms for millions of years, and so they couldn't do that, and they knew that. And so tanks, we assume, were full of fresh water for the most part. And then another part of the story is about a month ago, they claimed that they were dismantling tanks that they took apart, that they had emptied, and the IAEA certified and backed up everything, which is the least trustworthy organization I've ever seen in my life. They are pro-nuclear beyond any kind of concept the average person can handle or understand. And so what that meant, I lost my train of thought there. You couldn't go in and dismantle the tank after. So, and like, when you talk about workers who are actually talking about are homeless and destitute and victims of society and immigrants who don't speak the language. But you couldn't go and dismantle the tank because the tank is saturated with so much radiation, it's radioactive. So if I take a square foot of the tank with these incredible numbers we're talking about and put it in the wall of a subway, everybody walks past it for a million years will drop dead that day or that week because their organs will melt, among other things. So you can't dismantle the tanks. No, like they were showing us pictures of people in the tanks with torches, gasoline excited torches, and I know because I done that for about 6 months when I was young. So I'm very familiar with cutting up like metal that, a foot thick, for instance. You would gouge big long gouges in it originally, right? And then start to chop it up in chunks that the equipment or a person can lift, right? Basically, right? That's why you would do it that way. And so when you're talking about this kind of radiation, because we know we have a long legacy of science, you can't chop these tanks up. So, like, you have all this evidence, and then that's an overwhelming amount of evidence that the tanks were empty or only full of fresh water. It's an overwhelming amount. Now, all the tanks allegedly were connected so they can equalize each other because of rain and stuff like that, which meant they were open into the environment. So if you're talking about multiple sieverts and you're only acknowledging beta, you can't omit gammas, alphas, and neutrons. You can't just make that, like, scientifically, you can't separate one from the other because all the atoms are the same size for starters. So you can't separate cesium, uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, strontium from each other. Like the Ceres system allegedly was aggregating cesium-137. You can't do it because all the atoms are the same size. So your filter is not going to be able to distinguish from one isotope to the thousands of isotopes that are actually there. It just simply doesn't work. Science doesn't work that way. Okay. This is important for many reasons. And all of them affect you and your friends and your families, your loved ones, your hopes and dreams, every species on this planet. Congenital heart disease operations rose 14% after Fukushima. So congenital heart disease is open heart surgery for 14.2% of 100,000 children, every 100,000 across the entire country, which means 14,200 children need open heart surgery. We've seen similar attributes after Chernobyl, by the way. Okay. It's such a dishonest thing that they're doing, but the problem is it's lethal to everything with replicating cells. Okay, so we launched research expeditions for 6 years. And I was demonized and attacked and vilified and smeared. I've been shot at, assaulted, because I was out doing research expeditions for 6 years, doing species counts from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. Long, lonely, miserable, horrifying, tough. That's a treacherous coastline, by the way. There's 27,000 islands. It would take you 71 years to visit an island a day. So the species to your left, because I was a commercial diver and I had dove that whole coastline for many years. I'd stayed in all these anchorages. I was intimately we're at home on this coastline, the entire coastline, all the way to Alaska. And the reason we done it for 6 years was because when we went up the first year, the species to your left are missing. And because I'm very familiar with those species, I actually considered him my friend because I used to work on the ocean floor for 6 hours a day. I considered him my friend. And I consider myself every day to be incredibly privileged to be in their company. It's something you look forward to every single day. You never get sick of it. So then we're seeing in 2016 reports are coming out that the species, mussels and all the other species I'm showing you, have tumor cancers with a mutation allows them to spread cancer from one species to another species of marine life. So in this, you got all these sponges and sea anemones and starfish and everything else and algae. There were 600 algae. There was 78 species of starfish. They each came in multiple vibrant colors. There were 74 species of sponges. They all came in each species in multiple vibrant colors. There was, roughly around 7,000 species. There were 600 algae. There was 480 species of worms. There was the shellfish, like clams. There was razorback clams and little necks and manillas and gooey ducks and oysters and scallop and abalone and mussels and periwinkles and whelks. There was incredible diversity of these. And the beaches, each of the 27,000 islands, every one of them had multiple beaches of beautiful golden sand beaches that were made from the shells of the shellfish. Like the razorback, like the clams and the manillas, little necks, like the scallops and the abalones and the gooey duck shell. All these shells, these white pearly shells, is what gives the tropical rainforest, which is British Columbia, coastline, with 27,000 islands, this incredible golden beaches. And the beaches are still there, but the shellfish are not. I've dove on some of these, a lot of them, but I remember some in particular where you go underneath the beach, like you had drop-offs. You had drop-offs, and it's not really a good picture. We got lots of pictures of them when you go to my website, but you work at, say, 25 to 30 to 40 feet. So you might work 40 feet in the first part of the morning, but the rest of the day you're going to be up in very shallow water work and doing a decompression, right? So generally you want to stay for food harvesting, that type of food harvesting, you were going to try to spend 6 hours at less than 33 feet. And if you accidentally were going to go a little bit deeper, you would do it at the beginning of the day, right? But it's very complicated because you have residual nitrogen from each day that you got to put into the equation, right? Anyway, and so I remember going across this span. I knew there was a beach there because I had surveyed it off the side of the boat. So I would hang off the side of the boat, and the boat would tow me along the coastline, and I would tell the boat which way to go by pointing. And with my head underwater, sizing up, looking for whatever seafood harvesting we happened to be working at that point, right? And there was this spot I knew I could cross without coming back up to the boat, where it was, like a beach. The beach would run way down underwater because the beach was created by shellfish, right? But this one was a drop off. It was like a slice. So the whole coastline right there was like some creature came in and took a great big bite of the coastline, and it was about 50 feet. So I had to stay high, of course, which is not too hard to do that particular day. And the tide was in my favor. It would just move me past that section. It was a beach about 50 feet high underwater, carved out by the ocean over millenniums, of shellfish. So it was 50 feet deep of shellfish, and here was the golden sand at the surface. It was incredible. And there was enough there to fill up multiple container ships. So a container ship might have 5,000 transport trucks on it. And I remember just the awe, like the just awe-inspiring, and just the reality of how long that must have took, right, to create that particular sculpture of history. It was really something. And calcium, of course, which is what we're talking about, has a lot of uses, right? And so you think about, well, I can harvest this and mix, instead of using sand, have a better type of cement. That was one of the things that crossed my mind back there. It was just because there was so much of it, right? And those beaches are made of the shells breaking down over hundreds of thousands of years, right? Beautiful sand. And you couldn't find a shellfish on the beaches. They weren't on the beaches no more. And so you got all these different types of shells will break down, but you know how inside of it they got the beautiful, it's almost like an ivory kind of look to it, but it's not clearly not ivory. All right, and so Fukushima has killed the radioactive fallout from Japan, has exterminated all those species. They're exterminated. So this story really matters. This is not a game. And this is the defining moment in human history. This particular story, because this is an extinction event. What I showed you, you can pretend it's not all you want. I can't. I've done it for 6 years, 4 to 5 months a year, and it was a brutal experience. And it's not something that'll ever leave. Your mind will never forget that experience. First off, because it was traumatic to see the species gone. And we've done it for 5 more years to see if the species recovered. The species didn't come back. You had 600 algae. You had 480 species of worms. Very visible casings on the shorelines. You would find lots of that stuff. You had 78 species of starfish, 74 species of sea anemones. They all come in multiple vibrant colors. It was just there was 5,000 invertebrates without the backbones, like little shrimp that were living in the 600. Or it was actually 700 algae, different types of kelps, and they made up kelp forests and everything, where you had incredible communities of species living. It was 30,000 species of insects at the high tide line. It was unbelievable diversity. It was magic, and I used to tell people. When people would ask me what it was like diving that coastline, well, there was enough protein there to feed the entire planet without hurting it forever. Because you're talking about an amazing coastline. But this also went all the way into Alaska and all the way down California and New Mexico, too. But the tropical rainforest with the 27,000 islands that was isolated except for a few small communities. And, there was no roads going through all of those. They were all by ship and boats and float plane only. So these species are wiped out because Fukushima happened. And they abandoned the victims in the nuclear wasteland because they're a corporation. They're on the stock exchange. They can't go to jail. They can't be held accountable. You can't put Mark Zuckerberg in jail. You can just give him a great big fine, right? Because they're a corporation, sure. You can't put all the shareholders. All of these communities to your left, and now they're only acknowledging cesium. That's another trick they've been using against you. And so this story really matters because we're missing the big picture, uranium, plutonium. The biggest byproduct would have been curium isotopes. So no matter what cesium, there's 100 times strontium-90, by the way, but much more curium isotopes. And the curium isotopes, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. So this story really matters if you want to have a future, if you want your children to have a future, if you want humanity to have some kind of future. We got to approach the entire industry because the fuel pools are all hemorrhaging radiation 24 hours a day worldwide. There's 1,000 fuel pools splitting atoms directly into the environment up to tall, skinny stacks on every nuclear site. That's why they're surrounded by farms. This story matters. This story matters forever. Because this is your catalyst for so many issues we have right now in the last 14 years. One of them being extinction. If you get rid of all the species, guess what happens? You have 10,000 gray whales emaciated, 10,000 humpback whales emaciated, 10,000 beak whales emaciated. You have mass mortality events for every other species of whales. Unusual mortality events. Trying to blame it on everything but the actual appropriate offender, which is Fukushima broke the food chain. It was a pulse event of 36 reactor cores and 8 fuel pools at the top of 4 reactor buildings. The story matters. And the people that are anal about controlling the narrative, like the International Atomic Energy Agency, are nemesis of humanity and the species, and other control organizations, like the nuclear lobbying groups, have silenced me effectively silenced me, have demonized me, even in my my province, even my country, everywhere else on the planet. Anywhere I show up, they're going to go and demonize me. They're very good at their job. But because this story matters. So these counts here are per square meter of cesium-137. They're excluding every other isotope because it's convenient for them. You can't do that. All these communities, that's the population that wrote here, and the name of the communities. So this is United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Radiation study, and they downplayed the claim there was absolutely no adverse side effects from living in this, and you just only acknowledge in cesium. These are crazy to suggest that there's no adverse effects, because each one of these numbers represent a physical atom. You breathe it in your body. It sequesters in your muscles, your organs, and in your bones. Your body attacks it every second for the rest of your life with white blood cells. It pulses energy every second, and no matter whose body, insects, birds, mammals, animals, are going to pulse energy at the speed of light every second. It's going to wreck your chromosomes, your DNA, your cells. It's going to destroy them every second. Your body tries to repair that every second with white blood cells and attack the source with the white blood cells. It's a catastrophic effect. Your immune system is compromised on top of everything else. So it's very scary if you're a child or a senior citizen. And so when you look at these numbers, you look at these communities, don't think a second they're not doing it to you too. They're willing to do it to their own. Guess what? The 40% gray whale population shows up emaciated was 10,350 emaciated whales, because we broke the food chain. This is 19 and a half days, 468 hours of radioactive fallout. This is insane. This is only less than 3 weeks. That's the Norwegian Institute for Air Research. This was another model of the Xenon-133. You can't just have a single isotope. And when you see a thick plume with incredible numbers, this was 450,000 counts per minute, up to 1 million per square meter on the ground. Did a heat wave cause? Again, no, it didn't. They didn't assert that a heat wave caused it. They asked it to put that suggestion in your head. Of course, they didn't. A heat wave doesn't cause them to starve to death. So if you're going to go from 12 inches of blubber down to 2 inches of blubber, you're going to cover 10,000 kilometers before you can lose that much blubber on such a large creature, right? But because we've been tracking this and covering this and doing research expeditions in that environment, we can tell you without reservation that food chain is broken. And then everything started post-Fukushima. Same thing with the supercell typhoons, the supercell cyclones, the supercell hurricanes. These are post-Fukushima events. There have been ones during the nuclear testing, post-nuclear nuclear testing, during the nuclear testing. But you can trace the nuclear industry as the catalyst behind the decline of the species. So there's many other unusual mortality events for whales, all happening at the same time, and it's happening everywhere. It's not just like a so-called blob in the ocean. That's simply not. It's true in one context because we broke the food chain. We destroyed the bases of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestering chain, the phytoplankton. It's like saying that they were trying to blame the polar bear or the grizzly bears on climate change. But the grizzly bears, they eat grass, they eat roots, they eat berries, 200,000 berries a day. They can eat other bears, they can eat moose, they can eat elk, they can eat deer, they can steal animals from wolves and stuff like that. So there's no reason to be emaciated unless they got leukemia from the berries, because the berries will aggregate a lot of radiation. They ended up with radiation sickness, not able to uptake nutrition despite the fact that it exists. And where these bears were too, I had done research expeditions along that coastline too. The species are missing. Right? The bears don't just eat salmon. They could go down to the tide zone, they would eat all kinds of species down there, and that's gone. That's why all the birds, the migratory birds, were showing up emaciated, because the food chain supplements along the coastline are missing. So you had millions, and this was really interesting. You had over 1 million common murres, and they dive 600 feet all day, and they feed on anchovies and squid and sardines and krill and small species, 6, 7, 8, 9 inches, say. But at the same time, you had the Cassini auklets, over 1.4 million or so, of them showing up emaciated also. So you had 1 million emaciated common murres that dive 600 feet all day with ease. It's just genetically predisposition to do it. You have the Cassini auklets that feed on microscopic animals like zooplankton, phytoplankton. So you had two spectrums of the food chain showing up emaciated over thousands of miles at the same time. As I was out doing the research expeditions, showing you that we had an extinction event. Right? I should have we should have a big team. We should have 100 people, and they're reporting in every day on where they're to and the research that they're doing. The species are wiped out. We know that because we've done it for 6 years. And pretending this, what I'm telling you is not true, and pretending what I'm telling you is not important, pretending that what I'm showing you, I have documented, I have sacrificed everything, including my health, to do this, so that the academic community couldn't say they didn't know. And I'm active and boisterous because I want to make sure that the academic community can never say they didn't know. They can never say they didn't have the documentation or access to it because I provided it for them with the GPSs for free. It's available at my site for free. That was my purpose, was to educate the population, inform the population, and start a conversation. That was the intent. And also provide the documentation so that they can never say, well, we didn't know, or we didn't have access to the information, or no one showed us, no one told us, no one tried to warn us. When we've been here at least 5 days a week, every week, since this. And when we're not doing the research expeditions, I'm very active. And I don't lie and provide the documentations for my assertions. And not like a radio show where you got to take your word for it. I've done the hardest route where I provide you with the documentation. And each show is very difficult because I try to provide you with all the documentation every time. It's very painstaking. And at my last site on YouTube with 24,800 subscribers for 5 years, I never gained one or lost one. And with almost 3,000 presentations on it, including the expeditions. And he chipped away at that, including once with a court order where I had to take down 300 videos because I mentioned the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute and the Victoria University in them. Desperate to protect their assets, and they'll destroy everybody and everything to do it. They don't care. They don't have any emotions whatsoever, these people. I was in the courtroom and they have no emotions whatsoever. They're as cold as a rock. They have no humanity in them whatsoever. But I understand that's who these people are. I'm not going to let that scare me or intimidate me or chase me away. And yes, it does frighten me, but we don't have the option. We don't have the option because other people are not talking about this. And those species matter. You matter. You matter. The whales, the birds, they matter, okay? The bears, they really matter because we wiped them out in less than 14 years, but we've got an 80-year legacy of this stuff emitting into the environment. It really does matter. And we can trace all these whales, emaciated whales, to the broken chain post-Fukushima, not pre-Fukushima. These events we're looking at are post-Fukushima. And the ones pre-Fukushima were nuclear dumps, all the nuclear they were dumping into the ocean could account for a lot of them, and the nuclear weapons testing. But when you go back before that, you don't see these particular attributes. And right now they're trying to blame the bird flu, which wasn't even mentioned back during the research. And this story here, you're talking about, they're showing you these pictures, 3,500 sea lions they're saying had bird flu. This is not bird flu. This is emaciation. Bird flu could take the animals out in 5 or 6 days. This takes months to happen. This animal should be 1,100, 1,200, 1,500 pounds. And then at the same time, they're showing you this picture. This is incredible emaciated. Another one. Severe emaciation, conflating it with bird flu. So this industry controls your media, controls your university, but they can't control you. They can control you through the propaganda. But we don't. We have to deal with the nuclear industry. We got to move past the laws and deal with this. And this industry is so, and it's such a coward industry. The people in it are cowards. Like, they're the chicken necks, and they're the cowards of the cowards. They go to university, get incredible degrees, but they can't go out and get a job. They just keep getting more degrees, and the nuclear industry will recognize these dysfunctional morons, useful idiots, and hire them on in the nuclear industry and set them loose up on me and you and your loved ones and the 8 million species. You shouldn't be afraid of these cowards, these chicken necks. These are cowards. These academics and scientists and journalists, these are pure cowards. Refusing to stand out on their own. Refusing to tell the truth because it's easier and more, it's lucrative to tell the lies. There's 1,000 public relation firms that they use to bludgeon any dissenting voices. And what they've done to me over the years is unconscionable. And the problem with doing that to someone like me is, I'm not going to sit and take it. I don't give a shit about any of them. I care about you. I care about the species. I care about the future. And I care about humanity having a future and a species that can survive whatever the hell it is they just done to us. You got 10 billion crabs missing right out of the blue because the food chain is broken. Don't forget, look, they didn't pretend they're on top of a building that doesn't exist because it's like a banana and a potato chip walking in the sunshine. They done that because they knew that this was the effect. And like the species that are missing is 90%, more than 90% of the Bering Sea snow crab population, but 4 times the combined total number of snow crabs harvested by fisheries from 1977 to 2022. The entire legacy of snow crab, 4 times the amount is missing, is dead. Like all the whales I just showed you, the birds and the seals and the sea lions, that they so slickly try to conflate with a bird flu. And because your immune system is compromised, the bird flu can take out the species, but that's not the catalyst. The catalyst was Fukushima and 80 years now of the nuclear industry's emissions into your environment, the dumping, the perpetual releases. This is Fukushima plume model based on just 20 days of plutonium. Do you got any idea what plutonium does to mammals and animals and humans? You end up with 3 tumors just from the plutonium. And the skeleton is the typical one that causes the death the quickest and the most prolific. So you can count on all the species post-Fukushima, all the kids, all the humans are producing full-time, all the species included, are full-time producing radioactive hormones and radioactive stem cells. Anthropogenic man-made. This is a disgusting, and they knew this was eventually going to happen even without a nuclear meltdown because the fuel pools are always splitting atoms. Instead of boiling water for 1 million homes for each reactor core, they're splitting the same atoms into your community, and they're typically surrounded by farms to make sure they can get you in the supermarkets, to make sure you're going to eat it. And seeing those tanks are missing, that's quite the dilemma. They're not going to come out and explain it. I put that there in the poll. I put that in the poll because so I can remind myself to keep telling you this, what they're doing is real. That they're really doing it. They need to explain what they're doing. They can't explain it. And so we need to be able to challenge them. Nobody's going to challenge them. I'm willing to challenge them, but I don't have the support. So, like, I'm trying to educate the population as another way of challenging this industry. But they've managed to box me in and segregate me from the population because that's the most cowardly thing they could do. They were looking at what is the most cowardly thing they could do, and to them that was it. Pretend they're out of buildings that don't exist. Anyway. Anyway, that's I want to put a video out there so at least somebody come out and said, hey, because if I don't, you know what? Nobody will. If I don't come out and say, hey, there's something wrong, and important here, then nobody will. And that is one of the biggest crimes I can imagine. We live in a world of unmitigated cowardness. And the nuclear industry captured your universities, by proxy then your media, key positions in government and corporations. And they're literally have to destroy everything on the planet to keep doing what they're doing, to grow. And it's time, right? It's time to hold them accountable. It's time to get in their faces. It's time to have a conversation. It's time to gut up, because you got no time left. Your species are almost gone. You're right behind it. You're living in denial. And you can have a future. You just got to say, I want a future, and fight for it. Wake up the population. Right, they got the TV, but we got social media. We could do this. Alrighty. James put out another song, but I really want to hear. He put out a really good "Hold Me Like a Spent Fuel Rod." It's a really nice song. I'll play it on the next show. I want to hear "The Enrichment Man" as a closing song, because I think it's appropriate song today. Even though I should play "Hold Me Like a Spent Fuel Rod." That's a really good song, man. That's great stuff. And "Nuclear Exceptionalism," that's what we started off with. It was an amazing song he came out with last night. And "The Enrichment Man," I'm going to play that one today because, gosh darn it, I really like it. I say share and give me a thumbs up, but it doesn't matter. I'm censored. Come to your senses and go to war with me is what I want you to do. The world wants you to go to war with me, because I'm going to show you the facts, and then you can use it as a weapon against this industry. And that's the only option I got. Maybe you got better ones. I want to hear them. Have a great day, and see you tomorrow. Maybe I'll get a bit of extra rest. We got the rest of the parts for the machine showed up. Like 100 pounds of parts showed up there this morning. Fantastic. Have a good one. Take care.
You said the world needs power. I won't disagree. There's heat in the ground and the wind runs free. You call nuclear the future, but it won't power itself. Nuclear relies on coal more than coal needs itself. You said crypto was coming and demand would explode. That AI would load what the grid couldn't hold. But SMRs stay delayed, no ground ever breaks, and the public pays out while the promise remakes. You said it's the hour, but the plan's still the same. The technology is analog from the Cold War days. There's no place for the waste, and yuccas refused. Vented dry cast containers become the only refuge. You say you lead the charge with a federal hand. Would you vote Price Anderson or stand with the land? You call it advanced, but the cycle's well known. Still chasing a fuel that should have stayed in the stone. They brought in the waste with no warning or word. No records were filed and no voices were heard. The workers got sick, yet their claims were denied. But their jobs paid well, or so at the time. Say the same line again, just a little more vague. Let the cost wash away while the lobbyists wave. It's the same old plan with a new name again. And the public keeps paying again and again. The words that you sign will be printed and praised with a ribbon and stamp on a speech full of praise. This is abundance, they'll claim as they lead. But nuclear won't build what the future will need.